This is closing your spiritual perception. There, right at the beginning, I've named it. That dulling, that fog, that sense that something used to be clearer and now feels muffled. It's not necessarily your fault, and it's not always a moral failing. There are subtle mechanisms, some historical, some psychological, some energetic, that conspire, slowly or suddenly, to narrow how you receive the world beyond the ordinary. In the next few minutes, I will give you a simple embodied test you can perform on yourself to see whether that narrowing is present. If you want to try this now, type "seen" in the comments so I know you're with me. To understand what closes spiritual perception, we first need a small map. Nothing abstruse, just a working vocabulary that lets you point to the experience. Many ancient traditions speak of a single originating source, a primal unity from which everything that knows and feels is derived. In certain strands of early Christian-era thought, texts discovered in collections like Nag Hammadi, and passages attributed to writings such as the Gospel of Philip, this originating principle is sometimes called the monad. Think of it as the seed or spark of knowing within you, the place of deep memory or presence that remembers the whole, even when your everyday mind forgets. Those same traditions also name forces that interrupt or obscure that remembering. They use bold terms, demiurge, archons, but you can translate them into contemporary language as patterns, systems, or agents that shape perception from the outside or from within. The demiurge is portrayed as a kind of architect of the visible world, focused on form, separation, and control. Archons are like gatekeepers, subtle influences, habitual frequencies, collective assumptions that redirect attention, create doubt, and make the inner eye withdraw. When these dynamics take hold, the connection to that first source feels distant. You may still have glimpses, but they come through distortion or in rare fragments. I am careful to say this. The names I just used, monad, demiurge, archons, come from apocryphal and Gnostic traditions. When I reference them, I mean them as metaphors, and as part of a historical stream of thought found in texts such as those in the Nag Hammadi library and the Gospel of Philip, which are not part of the canonical scriptures most people are familiar with. They offer a language for experiences that many mystics everywhere have described, a felt center of origin and a set of forces that narrow perception. Whether you adopt the vocabulary wholesale or not, the functional map helps us point at what is happening and gives us a path for a practical check. So what concretely closes spiritual perception? There are 3 persistent mechanisms that show up again and again. First, dependence on external mediation. By that I mean the tendency to outsource your access to the sacred, to make your seeing contingent on another person's permission, a hierarchical institution, rigid dogma, or an assumed authoritative interpreter. Institutions and mediators are not inherently corrupt. They often hold wisdom and structure. But when they become the only doorway you accept, they can atrophy your capacity to receive directly. You begin to defer your inner confirmations to an external voice. The subtle effect is that the interior sense of truth becomes shaky. Instead of recognizing, you look for validation. That search for validation trains attention outward and dulls the capacity to meet the source in the quiet of your own body and silence. Second, frequency-shaping distractions. This is the most mundane-looking opponent. Technology, noise, busy schedules, relentless consumption, and thought patterns that loop and amplify fear or doubt. These are like background frequencies that drown out a softer signal. If you've ever tried to hear someone whisper across a crowded room, you know the analogy. You can only hear the whisper when the room quiets. Chronic anxiety, compulsive scrolling, habitual cynicism, all these set up a nervous tone that makes subtle perception hard to register. The archonic language names this as something that actively reroutes your attention. In practical terms, it's the brain and environment learning to expect only loud inputs and ignoring the delicate ones. Third, ignoring the body as an intelligence. Many spiritualities have separated mind and body, or have privileged the mind's concepts over the body's immediate knowing. Yet our body carries memory, thresholds, and sensory cues that are among the most honest measures of inner states. When you stop paying attention to bodily signals, subtle tensions, soft openings, micro-sensations, you lose a primary instrument for discerning presence. The texts I mentioned use embodied markers to indicate origin and receptivity precisely because the body remembers what the mind has been taught to forget. If you want to know whether these mechanisms have made a dent in your own perceptual field, there's a pragmatic, safe, and simple way to check yourself. The tradition points to 3 embodied indicators, subtle places that many have reported as meaningful when they come alive. Again, these references are drawn from apocryphal sources and from experiential reports. Treat them as subjective indicators, not as medical proof or a fixed spiritual taxonomy. The 3 places are the base of the skull, a spot along the outer edge of the hand between the little finger and the wrist, and the area just above the center of the chest. Each point functions, in this frame, as a marker: origin, perception, and command. What follows is a guided self-check that invites awareness, not belief. Before we begin, a few safety notes. Use only gentle pressure. If anything causes pain or significant discomfort, stop immediately. This is an inward check for sensation and attention. It's not a diagnosis, and it doesn't replace medical or psychological care. If you have medical conditions regarding your neck, hands, or chest, proceed with extra caution or skip the physical touches and simply attend inwardly to each zone. Start by settling into a comfortable seat. Let your spine be supported but not rigid. Close your eyes if it helps you focus. Take 3 slow, conscious breaths. Inhale through the nose, fill the belly, hold a beat, then exhale fully through the mouth. With each out-breath, imagine letting down something heavy. Expectation, urgency, the habit of performance. Let your breathing be a soft anchor. Now, with 2 fingers, place the pads of your fingertips gently at the base of your skull, where the neck meets the head. Use only light contact. You might feel warmth, a subtle pressure, a small electrical tickle, or nothing at all. You might notice memories, a sense of opening, a small uncoiling, or emotional colors passing through. For many, this is associated with a sense of origin, something that echoes a deeper memory. Stay here for 20 to 30 seconds and notice without labeling. If a critical thought intrudes, "This is silly," "I'm not feeling anything," note it as a thought and return to the sensation, like coming back to the breath. Release your hand and bring your attention to the outer edge of one hand, the side where the little finger is, about midway between the wrist and the base of the small finger. Rest your other hand so that 2 fingers lightly touch this area. Again, soft pressure only. This spot has been described as a line of perception, as if it registers contact with subtle impressions. You may notice a slight change in temperature, a tingling, a sense of readiness, or nothing at all. Notice whether this area feels closed, flat, open, or sensitive. Allow whatever appears, silence, movement, nothing, to be simply reported by your attention. Next, place your hand, fingers together, gently on the center of your chest, just above the sternum. Rest there with a readiness that isn't grasping, an inner listening. Many people report a sensation that responds, a small resonance at the chest's center that some traditions label as a command center or a point of reception. You might feel a soft expansion, a small pulse, an emotional tone, or again, perhaps nothing immediately. The key here is to receive whatever arises without expectation. Spend another 20 to 30 seconds here, breathing slowly. Observe whether your attention naturally stays with the body, or whether it wants to flee into commentary, planning, or doubt. If the latter happens, that instinct to judge, to mock, to minimize, that reaction itself is meaningful. It often functions exactly as the texts warn, a reflexive defense that closes the door right as a possibility of insight is pressing in. Many people will experience an immediate inner critic whose voice insists the practice is nonsense, that any sensation is imagined, or that the whole exercise is self-deception. Name that voice for what it is, a defensive loop, and then gently return to the body without scolding yourself. If, during any of these touches, you felt something subtle, a warmth, a spark, a slight movement, an emotional resonance, take note. Even the faintest response is information. It suggests there is an available register of perception that can be cultivated. If you felt nothing at all, that, too, is data. It may indicate that the perceptual field is more heavily constricted at this time, or that you need repeated, gentle cultivation to wake this faculty. Expect resistance. This cannot be overstated. The mind is remarkably inventive in producing reasons to nullify delicate experiences. You may find yourself thinking, I only imagined that, I don't have that gift, or this is superstition. Those thoughts are not a defect. They are a predictable part of the system that dampens perception. Imagine them as static on a radio, noise that appears precisely when a weak signal tries to come through. Your task is not to wage war on the critic, but to treat it like weather. Acknowledge its presence, note its tone, and keep returning attention to the anchored sense in the body. Now, to give this a small practical lever toward reopening, I'll offer a brief declaration to speak quietly or silently. Words are not magic in themselves. They are directives for attention. The following phrase is designed to both name the closure and to align you toward receptivity. Say it slowly, with intention, not as a promise but as a claim of willingness. I recognize what has been closing my perception. I open to what remembers me. I receive sight, gently and with care. Repeat that phrase 3 times, breathing between each repetition. As you say it, soften into the center of your chest where your hand still rests, or simply keep the image of that center in your mind. Be patient with whatever comes. You may notice a small loosening, a lightness, a shift in tone, or simply a quieter mind after the 3rd repetition. If nothing dramatic occurs, that's fine. This is the first step in a process. The act of naming an intention is itself a gesture of reclaiming agency over your own interior field. After the declaration, sit for another minute and observe. Pay attention to 2 things. First, whether any of the 3 points you touched maintain a lingering quality. Second, how your mind responds. Does it feel more curious, more skeptical, more calm? All of those responses are valid. Many people report that the first time they attempt this, the inner critic shows up loudly. Others feel a subtle confirmation. Neither is a verdict on your worth or spiritual status. Consider the practice as a diagnostic exercise and an invitation rather than as a final test. If you felt a clear response in 1 or more points, consider a gentle protocol of daily repetition. 10 breaths, brief touch to each point, soft declaration. Build a habit of attending to the felt places rather than to intellectualizing them. If you felt nothing, practice the same routine for a week with kindness. Often, the perceptual apparatus needs repeated, unhurried attention to come online. Resist the temptation to judge the speed of your progress. Perception is not a sprint, but an attunement that deepens with calm, steady interest. There are practical, social consequences to this kind of work. As your capacity to perceive subtlety wakes, you may find less need for constant external validation. You may begin to notice how institutions, authority figures, and dominant cultures have taught you to outsource judgment. That doesn't mean you must abandon all structures. Many are necessary and nourishing. But you can learn to balance external guidance with an internal mutuality of listening, asking both, what does my body know? And, what do wise teachers say? This balance prevents the 2 extremes of brittle isolation on one side and dull dependence on the other. Remember, though, that resistance from others is real. Some will find such practices strange and may try to delegitimize them. Hold compassion. For many modern people, the senses of inner perception and embodied knowing have been long neglected. It can be disorienting when someone steps back into such capacities. Part of reclaiming perception is also learning how to communicate the experience without forcing it onto others. Share the practice, invite others to try it on their own terms, respect that everyone's path is different. A word about history and context may help guard against confusion. The language and images I used earlier, monad, demiurge, archons, come from streams of early Christian and related philosophical thought that were sidelined by the later dominant ecclesial structures. Discoveries like the Nag Hammadi codices in the 20th century brought many of these texts back into conversation. The Gospel of Philip, for instance, is an apocryphal text that uses symbolic language to speak about memory, intimacy with the source, and barriers to knowing. These writings are valuable for their phenomenological descriptions, the ways they name inner states and practical signs, rather than for making canonical claims. Use them as evocative maps, not as exclusive truth claims. Finally, a gentle reminder about expectations. This practice does not promise miraculous healing, instant enlightenment, or a total bypass of ordinary life. What it offers is a practical embodied litmus test and a first tool in a longer process of return. The aim is not to exalt you above others, but to give you an immediate way to notice whether your inner instrument for perception is alive and how to begin coaxing it back. The simplest outcome you can hope for is increased sensitivity to subtle cues, a clearer sense of when attention has been hijacked, and a steadying of the inner witness that can discern truth from mere noise. If this message landed for you, if the check revealed something, or even if it simply raised questions, I'd love to hear it. Share your experience in the comments and let the community learn with you. If you want deeper, practical activations that build on this first exercise, subscribe so you don't miss the next guided practice where we'll expand on ways to stabilize perceptual openings safely and responsibly. To close, this is what has been closing your spiritual perception: externalized validation, frequency-shaped distraction, and neglect of the body's memory. And this is the first, gentle way to test and begin to reverse it. Practice with patience. Notice the inner critic without shame and return again to the body. Over time, with steady attention, the subtle registers of perception can become more reliable companions. If you tried the test, type "seen" below and tell us what you noticed. Thank you for bringing your attention here, and take care of the body that holds the doorway to what remembers you.